Hey everyone, I'm so excited. Like Bidley said, I'm Molly. I'm a product designer from Denver, Colorado, and I've been specializing in Figma design systems for the past few years. In addition to consulting with teams, I build and share Figma resources like my UI Prep design system and teach a course called Design System Bootcamp, where I guide students through the process of building a design system in Figma from scratch. And every time I run this course, I see students make similar mistakes. So today I'm going to share a few of the most common ones and how to avoid them. Like adding too many color variables, adopting to new features too quickly, using groups instead of frames, creating jumbo component sets, and not prepping icons. Oh. There we go. So the first mistake I see is adopting to new features too quickly. And every year, Figma releases features that are completely game-changing. Variants will release more surprises coming after that. So the mistake I'm seeing is some students make adopting the first wave of variables too quickly. And I don't blame them. Being able to tokenize your system with variables is huge, and they're already really powerful. So here are a few ways to adopt these new changes slowly to hopefully bring you and your team the most value while de-risking your efforts. Start by incorporating variables that are adding something brand new to your system instead of replacing something that already exists, like your color styles. For example, the ability to have saved and reusable numbers is a brand new concept. So adding number variables is a safe place to start. You won't need to refactor or remove anything that already exists in your Figma files. So you can start with a new collection of variables to support a few different categories. I think it's a little high. OK. Like sizing for components and icons, spacing, corner radiuses, and breakpoints. Then apply them to your existing designs. This part's a little tedious, but there's a plugin called Apply Variable that can automate the process for you. To use it, select your component or design, apply the Apply Variable plugin, choose the option to autofix, in this case with local variants, and we'll update numbers for the selection. And now if we go back and check, we'll see the spacing variables have been updated, in addition to sizing and corner radius. So we can see that adding number variables is a fairly light lift for any design system, and a really great place to start. Another way to de-risk the adoption of variables is to make a detailed plan before you start. Map out your proposed new or updated token system and file structure, something that takes into consideration what the goals for the system are today and what the goals might be further down the roadmap. Let's start with tokens. For some small teams with limited product scope, a simple variable map might work well. Using general semantic names like brand default, which can be used across many applications. For example, this variable might be used for text, backgrounds, and icons. Others might do better with a more typical structure, having a semantic variable for each individual application. Text, backgrounds, icons, borders, all have their own dedicated variables. And some might need a much more complex map with support for multiple brands and/or themes with the use of variable modes. And while it's possible to contain these variables in a single file, it's likely that these variables should be split into multiple files, perhaps a separate file for each brand, and maybe even further, with each variable collection in a separate file. Now let's go over file structure in more detail. For some teams, a simple structure might be best, keeping all foundations and components in one file makes the system quick and easy to navigate and update. Others might find a lot of value in splitting the foundations up into multiple files to make the system more dynamic, giving designers the ability to only turn on the exact team libraries they need for each design file. For example, projects A and B might be for a product and need all the foundations, while project C might be for a marketing website and only need some of them. Again, there's also the option to split the primitive and semantic collections into separate files, offering the highest level of control and flexibility in the future. This is especially helpful if your system plans to support multiple brands now or in the future. So having a plan will help your team get on the same page and make smarter decisions about how everything's structured. Now, if your current system is serving the team pretty well, don't rock the boat. Take small steps towards using color variables. Instead of deleting all of your color styles and starting fresh with variables, consider keeping your styles and just adding variables to them. This way, your designs won't need refactoring. Your designers and developers won't need to change their workflow, and you'll still gain the ability to tokenize your system and support multiple modes. To do this, you'll first add primitive variables for all of your colors, like gray, blue, green, etc. Then feed those variables into another collection for your semantic colors, like text, background, icons, and borders. And once you have both collections set up, feed the semantic collection into your existing styles. You can do this by editing each style and swapping the hex code for the new semantic value in your library. Just search for the name and apply it. So if you already have semantic color styles that work for your team, this is a really easy way to quickly and safely adopt color variables. If you do want to make the full switch, consider rolling out this update to just one team or product area. See how well adoption goes, make any necessary updates, and expand to the next. This will make the change more manageable and ensure you don't go too far off the rails as you make this big update. Lastly, thoroughly explore and test the new features before you start applying them to your system. A great way to do this is with a practice project. Instead of updating your current system, build a new model system with the changes you hope to adopt and test the limits in a safe sandbox. Another mistake is adding too many color variables. Once you and your team feel good about your variable adoption plan, it's time to start thinking about how to actually add the new color variables. Especially color variables, one mistake I often see is adding too many colors too quickly, making the new color system confusing and difficult to maintain. To avoid this, add as few variables as possible. I'll share a few tips on how. But first, let's take a peek at the end result. Here's an example of a primitive collection. This is where you can create color variables that store the hex values for your palette. Most primitive collections will look something like this with a handful of colors, each with simple numeric names and a hex code. Once these are added, they'll feed into the semantic collection with names based on that color's use case, like text, brand, default. But before you add these, there's quite a bit of planning to do. Start by adding your color scales to a page in Figma. If you're starting from scratch, you don't need to waste your time finding the perfect colors for your brand. Instead, borrow from another well-tested system and focus on how these different colors will be used within your UI. Once a system is established, go back and change the exact colors to match your branding. After all, being able to make changes quickly and easily is one of the biggest perks of variables. So start by adding color scales from your existing product, another system, or a plugin. In the UI prep system, I added colors from Adobe Spectrum. You can do the same by opening the Super Palette plugin. and inserting the color scale into your file. Now, the first way to reduce the amount of color variables in your system is to only add color scales you're certain are needed. It's easy to assume your product or website needs a primary color, a secondary color, all 3 feedback colors, and a sprinkle of accent colors for good measure. But in reality, that's often not the case. Does your product actually use that secondary color? Maybe not. How often do you really use the yellow warning color, even after you spend forever getting a few shades to be remotely accessible? The answer might be never. So don't add colors you think should be in your design system. Add colors you actually need right now. This UI kit has 6 colors, including gray, but some teams might only need 2 or 3. Gray for all the basics, maybe blue for your brand, and possibly red or for an occasional error. And that's a perfectly good place to start. Now you'll notice that Adobe and other palettes include 10 to 14 tints and shades, a lovely progression from light to dark, but far too many options for almost any design system. The second way to reduce your color variables in your system is to only add what's needed. Take a close look at your product and identify a small number of tints and shades needed to support your backgrounds, text, icons, and borders. Keeping these use cases consistent across all scales will keep the product looking cohesive and your colors easier and more predictable to use. Let's take a look at how we could use these colors in the UI prep system. Essentially, every system will need a strong default color for text, backgrounds, icons, and borders. So let's use 900 for all 4 of them. We'll also need a hover and a down color to support different button and link states. So we'll add them too as 1000 and 1100. Many teams might be able to stop here, but some might also need a color for special data UI, so let's use 700 for that. And maybe a color for low contrast backgrounds, we'll use 100. So for a fairly comprehensive system, we only need about 3 to 5 colors from each scale. Aside from gray, which typically needs a few extra colors for its very important but more subtle use cases. Some of you who want to add variables to an existing system rather than starting from scratch might be thinking this is going to be a lot harder for us. And you're not totally wrong. But if you take one extra step and do a detailed color audit of your system, you'll be in much better shape. A color audit can look something like this: documentation of every color found in your system and in your live product, with a hex code and note about where it was found. Once the colors are lined up, you might be a little horrified about how many there are. That's okay. Go through, decide what to keep, consolidate, or ditch. And this might also be a good time to make a few tweaks and optimize your accessibility. Once you're done, add these colors to your variable map. And once everything is mapped out, add the ones with labels as primitive color variants. You can do this by using the hex code or the color dropper tool. Then add a semantic collection with groups and subgroups for each semantic category. And then feed each color with the appropriate primitive. A quick pro tip: once you create one full category, right-click to duplicate the entire thing for a head start on the next category. For almost every team, I recommend stopping here. It's possible to go one level deeper and create a component-specific collection for variables. So instead of using the semantic background colors for all different types of backgrounds, you would use button backgrounds for buttons, input backgrounds for inputs, card backgrounds for cards. You get the idea. And while this does have some advantages, it's simply too much for most teams. So this level of planning, scrutiny, and documentation will help keep your variables from exploding out of control and becoming more confusing than they are helpful. One of the most foundational mistakes I see students make is using groups instead of frames, which sounds like a rookie mistake, but you'd be surprised how often it comes up, especially for anyone who recently transitioned from another design tool like Sketch or Adobe. Using groups can be a hard habit to break, and sometimes leads to confusion when working on a design system. At first glance, groups and frames seem very similar. They're both ways to organize your file by nesting child layers under one top parent layer, making it easy to keep these layers together, select them all at once, or move them around your designs. However, frames have many special powers that groups don't have. Not only are they capable of housing nested layers like a group, but they're also objects themselves that behave like shapes. Frames can be resized independent of their content. They can have fills for solid, gradient, and image backgrounds, strokes and effects applied to them. And they behave like artboards found in other tools, with the ability to have grids and layouts applied to them. They can also be responsive, with auto layout and constraints applied to them and their children, making it possible to resize and reflow content, like a button growing longer with more text. A list of chips wrapping to create more lines. A table being able to expand and shrink with the breakpoints. And easily adding and removing content. Lastly, they can have overflowing content like a carousel. Just position the child layers past the bounds of the frame and turn clip contents on to create a masking effect. So if you ever find yourself wondering why one of these features isn't available, check to see if you're using a group or a frame. That might be the issue. Here are a few helpful shortcuts to create a frame. You can frame objects by pressing F and drawing a selection. Frame a selection by pressing Option Command G. Or what I end up doing the majority of the time, go straight to a frame with auto layout applied by using the shortcut Shift A. And lastly, you can turn any group into a frame using the drop-down at the top of the design panel. Now, I don't want to hate on groups too much. They are fast and easy in a pinch, and helpful with icons and illustrations. But if you're creating components for a design system, I challenge you to build the new habit and only use frames for the next 30 days, especially if you recently transitioned to Figma. The fourth mistake is creating jumbo component sets. It can be tempting to create really large component sets that can do it all. I think we've all been guilty of this at least once, especially back in that first wave of variant updates. This is a mistake I'm still seeing designers make. In an effort to consolidate and simplify their system, they're sometimes making it more difficult to use. For example, a single button that can be customized into almost anything with all the different properties and variants available, which might work just fine and look a bit impressive to any onlookers, but it tends to put more work on the designers who are actually using the button in their day-to-day work. If a designer needs, let's say, a danger outline button, and they go to look in the assets panel, first they have to remember that it even exists. Second, they have to remember that it's part of a component that it looks nothing like in the assets panel. And third, they have to make multiple updates to the button before they even start customizing the text or the icon. Alternatively, If buttons are split into smaller, more specific sets, they're much easier to discover, find, and use. For example, if the buttons are split by type, it's possible to see all the options in the Assets panel and add exactly what's needed. My preference is to keep variants for different sizes together, as long as size is the only difference. Otherwise, the Assets panel can feel cluttered with many component thumbnails that are hard to distinguish between. If you already have large component sets, don't worry, splitting them up is easy and low risk. Simply drag and drop a collection of the variants onto the frame, onto the canvas. And don't worry, they'll remain as main components, so your instances will be safe and sound. Then combine these stranded components as a new variant set. Quick pro tip, I like to use a typical UI background as the fill for component sets, so it's easier to see and test how the component will look in the actual UI. The properties need to be renamed, but the values will carry over. And make sure to remove the variants that previously defined that group. In this case, the button type and hierarchy. And then incorporate them into the new component name. Creating a brand new component set is even easier. If you need multiple components with similar variants and properties like these buttons, start by creating one set like this one, then duplicate the entire thing and make an identical independent component. All it's left to do is update the name and customize the new component. In this case, let's make this one a success button and swap out the background colors. This can save a lot of time when creating many similar components, like buttons, inputs, badges, table columns, things like that. Let's take a quick look at inputs as well. With their many possible types and states, these sets can get a little unhinged, but breaking them down by type makes using them a much better experience. So if we look in the Assets panel, we can see each possible input nicely laid out. And when it's added to the page, we can start customizing the content right away. The final mistake is not prepping icons for your design system. Icons are small and cute. They could never cause any problems, right? That's what a lot of my students think when they start building their design system. But every cohort, I get confused and panicked questions about why some icons seem determined to sabotage their design system. Like when the sizing changes because you swap the icon. The color doesn't change everywhere when you update the styling. Or updates in the wrong place entirely. And my least favorite, when the color and/or icon reverts back to a previous form while customizing the component. To avoid these and other icon abominations, here are a few things you can do to prep your icons and make sure they perform well across your designs. Place each icon on its own square with uniform minimum padding, if they're not already, so that every icon will be in the same size, 24 by 24 in most cases. Meaning a tall and skinny icon and a short, fat icon will take up the same amount of space in your designs, making spacing, sizing, and alignment much easier. Make sure your icon is a single vector shape rather than multiple layers that have been placed into a group. If needed, you can use the union tool to make multiple shapes come together as one. This will ensure the entire icon changes color when being styled. Give each vector object across all icons the exact same name, like vector or shape. This will help icons swap properly with each other and preserve any previous overrides made to them. Remove any additional shapes hiding in the background, like a transparent square behind the vector. This often causes issues when a designer applies a new fill. The hidden square will take on the new color instead of the vector. Make your icons responsive by setting the vector constraints to scale, so the shape will scale up and down at different sizes. Speaking of, students often ask how to handle different sizes of icons. There's a few ways. You could let designers update the size freehand, which might lead to inconsistencies. You can create all possible sizes and combine them as a component set with different variables, which can be a little tedious. You can use the icon wrapper, which can feel a little bit like a hack. Or you can use my favorite new option, create a specific group of number variables for icons that designers can choose from. Now for a little fun, let's go through some of my favorite tips rapid fire style. Discovering a handful of tips and tricks that improve your workflow are worth their weight in gold. So I hope you find at least one of these that will save you some time. First, update your nudge amount to 8 pixels to always stay aligned with your 8-point grid. For example, if I use the arrows on my keyboard while holding Shift, the objects will nudge over 8 pixels at a time, and I won't have to do any math to make sure I'm staying true to the base unit. To update your nudge amount, go to the main menu, open Preferences, and select Nudge Amount. By default, it's set to 10, but you can use any number you want, although I recommend 8. Keep some things hidden from your team library by adding a period or underscore to the beginning of the name. This can be helpful for really small components that are only meant to be nested inside of other larger components, like this button group. Because there's a period in the name, we won't see that the component listed in the Assets panel. This can also be done with styles and variables. Like the primitive collection that we saw earlier, because of the dot, designers will only be able to choose from the semantic collection, not the primitive collection in the menu. Double-click layer icons to be taken to that exact layer on your page. This comes in handy when you're trying to find something specific on a busy page, like a particular component, or maybe an icon that you just dropped in from plugin and have no idea where it went. Let's give it a try. I find I use it the most when I move a layer between pages, and for some reason it decides to hide from me every single time. Rather than panning around looking for it, you can double-click the layer to be taken directly to it. Make finding the right semantic variable easier for your designers by reducing its scope, meaning it'll only appear as an option for certain properties. Let's take a look. In UI Prep, the colors meant for text are only available for text. The colors meant for backgrounds are only available for frames. The colors meant for icons are only available for shapes. And lastly, the colors meant for borders are only available for strokes. And this can also be done for different categories of numbers. So let's give a few of these a try. Now it's much easier to add variables for the background, the text layers, the icon, and the corner radius. This will make life a lot easier for your designers and help ensure variables are used how they were intended. Lastly, Use Auto Layout's canvas stacking order for more than just avatars. We've all seen this classic example where it's possible to switch the stacking order from first on top to last on top. But it's also really helpful for things like a drop-down menu. When this input is set to active, it shows a drop-down menu just below the input field, thanks to the magic of absolute position and clip contents. But what happens when there's a message below the menu, like a hint or an error? The layers get in each other's way. But if we change the stacking order, the field and its menu will rise above the messages. We can even take this one step further and apply this new stacking order to a form to avoid something like this. Let's change the order for the entire form. Perfect. This little auto layout feature can be a lifesaver for any object meant to hover over others. So those are the most common traps and pitfalls I see my students fall into. Hopefully now you'll know how to fix or avoid them when they come up. And if you want to learn more, you can always join my newsletter for more tips, or my course, Design System Bootcamp, which has a new cohort starting in just a few weeks.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you, Jeremy, for the conversation. Excellent. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. So many useful tips. We have so many questions.
I'm excited to hear them.
I don't know. We're probably going to be here for a couple of hours now. Thank you so much for everyone, by the way, bringing the questions both online and also, of course, here. Well, also online, because we did online. It's great. One of the questions, please, as we are kind of having a conversation in here, if you could keep your voice a bit louder, that would be better. One question that came up very quickly, I think it was like right away. I just need to find it where it was. It was, our team is stuck with Adobe XD. What would you suggest us to do when we want to migrate our large design system to Figma? Anybody in this position, by any chance? Anybody stuck somewhere else, not in Figma? A few people? A few people. OK. So how would, is there like any sort of
This is something I run into a lot. A lot of my students are switching over tools. And the good news is Figma's pretty similar enough to Adobe where once you do start learning it, you're going to pick up on everything really quickly. But just that initial transition, it takes a little time to get used to the new tool. So my recommendation is kind of what I was saying in my first mistake of take things a little slow. Maybe build out a practice project. A design system, maybe a small part of your project, just as an experiment to see how the different files might interact with each other, how the components are working, what's going to be the best structure and token system, and all these things in Figma. And then once you feel confident in that little test, then actually apply it to your actual transition. And then again, start slow. Maybe if you have a large product, just start with one area of it, or just with one team on that product, and kind of see how things go, make changes if needed, and then keep going and keep expanding to the entire system.
Right, because there is obviously no like simple plugin where you can actually go from one and the other.
Unfortunately not. You can't just export and then import the files.
Not yet, at least.
I guess maybe you can, but I wouldn't trust it.
Right, right. Mario is wondering, naming tokens takes time. Renaming tokens breaks systems. I see a lot of resources thrown onto naming tokens, even if it's not needed, but just to be prepared. What do you think about starting only with global tokens and only add semantics later if needed?
I think that's fine, especially if you're feeling a little unsure about the tokens in the system. I wouldn't try and start right in the deep end. I would start really simple and small again. And as you're feeling more comfortable, add more complexity, add more detail to the system.
OK, makes sense. Well, one that came up quite a bit is, how do you actually measure how successful your system or design system is? What metrics and strategies would you recommend?
That's a great question. So to measure the success, it's really a product for the designers. So measuring things like how long it takes your designers to build something, how many inconsistencies and bugs are you finding in your designs? There's some pretty good like hard facts you can track to make sure that you're actually accomplishing what you set out to accomplish and that you are making ultimately life for your designers easier and faster.
Right. There was also, I think, an article by Pinterest team a couple of years ago, I think now, where they were working on something that I think they called was it fixed stats or something similar? Where the idea was, well, we just need to track the relative adoption rate, and the way to do that would be to see of all the components or pages or flows that we're producing in Figma, the ones that are marked as finished, how many of them are actually using some of the parts of the design system. So they will kind of call it a relative adoption rate because it's relative to the time, like over the last 2 months or last 2 weeks, how many of those design system components we were using. I think that was actually quite interesting to see this, and actually I think open sourced it as well. So if you look for fixed stats, you might find it as well. So just something that...
Yeah, I know with Figma I think if you're on the enterprise plan, you can nicely track the component usage. If you're not on that plan, you can still go through and try and keep track of how things are being used, and hopefully they're making everyone's lives their work a little faster.
Absolutely. Matthias is wondering, why do you prefix color primitive with a dot and not the semantic collection? You could rearrange them by dragging, and then I guess ... That's
I understood the first part of the question. So the dot at the beginning of the name, just like with a component, if you're using a really small atomic component, you might put a dot in front so it's hidden from the team library. You can do the same thing with styles and variables. So often, many teams will want the primitive collection to be hidden. So it's only available in that one file. But when you publish that one file as a team library, and then you're using it in a separate, say, design file, you won't see that primitive collection. You'll only see the semantic collection. So you're only choosing from the semantics, and which is often how they're intended to be used. So it's just a nice way to simplify the number of choices designers have to make.
Okay. Another question from Matthias that came right after it. Would you recommend having the 1 to 100 number in color primitives reflect the actual lightness value of the color, 1 to 1, or not? Yeah.
Can you say it one more time?
Would you recommend having the the range from 1 to 100 in color primitives to reflect the actual lightness value of the color 1 to 1?
I like using just 1 through 100. I think it's nice and simple. But if your team wants to, I know I have seen some teams who will figure out the exact contrast ratio, and like that'll be part of the color name. That's also great if your team wants to do that. It's a bit of a more complicated step to get there, so I don't think it's necessary for most teams, but if it helps your team, then I say go for it.
Okay. There was one that also came up. How do you solve the tedious problem of typography scales and styles and applying them in components, for example, buttons, input fields, etc.?
So the problem of having typography styles and applying them to your components?
Yeah, so if you have, let's say, you have rich typography and you have a typographic scale or some styles, and you want to apply them universally, I guess, for all components, for example, buttons, input fields. I guess we're talking also about vertical written, I guess, at this point, maybe. How would you try to make it work? This is probably, I guess, the question.
Okay. I'm not sure if I completely understand it, but you'd go through and apply, if you're doing this kind of retroactively, you have all these text styles and all these components without the styles applied. There are some plugins, I think Style Organizer and a few others can help you kind of bulk apply these styles. I also really like for certain very specific components, like buttons and inputs in particular, especially input labels, to have a specific component level style for that. So for buttons, I'll have a specific button text style, and labels, one for labels, which is really nice because they often have a slightly different style. Maybe they're a bit more bold, maybe the letter spacing is a bit more generous. Maybe you have caps lock, maybe you have sentence caps or word caps. So you can kind of control them at a finer level since they are so specific. So for those ones, I recommend having a little more specific nuance. Yeah,
do you have, like, let's say, because everybody asked this question, do you have like special plugins, like obscure hidden plugins or tools that you always recommend to everyone that most people are not aware of?
I'm not sure. I feel like I recommend them so much they don't feel obscure to me. But which ones do I use a lot? I use Super Palette, which you saw, Style Organizer, Contrast. There's a whole bunch that I
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be nice to see just wonderful posts by Modified, all the wonderful things that I use for my work or something like that. That would be probably lovely. One other question, maybe just two more before we wrap up. If you use T-shirt sizes for naming your semantic size, tokens, it's difficult to remember which one to choose or to introduce new values. What's your opinion about referring to the actual value on the token name, for example, spacing 8 or spacing 24?
I understand the temptation to do that because it makes so much sense. But the second you decide, instead of this one token being 8 pixels, I actually want it to be 16 because we're going to have everything be a lot bigger. All of a sudden, your name doesn't make sense because spacing 8 is now actually 16 pixels. So you could run into trouble later. What I like to do is I like to name the most common variable, something like base or medium, or so I kind of know the starting point. And then instead of just medium, so I can have base and then large, extra large from there, and small, extra small from there. So at least you have a sense of where the middle is, where the default setting is.
Okay. And maybe the last one, how do you get around merging two big design systems into one?
Oh, we might need more time.
We have 2 minutes, 40 seconds.
Merging two big design systems into
I guess
one.
I guess the idea is the rationale with that for that is I think that many of us have started working on design systems maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago when we just started looking around. Do we need one? Should we have one? Let's build one. Let's create one. Is it working? Okay, that's fine. And at this time, where I think that many of us are like, okay, so this team decided to create their own little thing, which turned out to become a design system for them, or UI, whatever you want to call that, let's say there. And then we have that product team all the way over there. They had the same intention. They created the same thing. And so it grows over time, and you end up with multiple design systems almost competing. Do we use this one? No, we're using this one. It's just kind of creating this kind of tension. So if you want to bring maybe a couple of those systems together into one unit, because there were also many questions coming up about we have basically some parts from material and some parts from something else, and how would they fit together, right? So when this merging in somehow has to happen, what would be a good way to do that?
I wouldn't even think about that as really a problem if you have maybe some local components in local component libraries starting to get really popular and used a lot. That's great news. That means you've identified a component that you need on a global level. I'm a big fan of spreadsheets, maybe keeping track of these components and their use. And once one component is being used in multiple places with some frequency, then maybe that kind of graduates up into a global design system. And that global design system can stay really small for a while. And you can just kind of slowly add to it as the need arises. So I wouldn't say you need to do a full switchover. You can just kind of let things naturally grow and become ready for that next level.
Okay. Well, maybe that's the last one. Do you have, like, a wish list, a dream feature that you wish Figma had and that would make your life so much easier in so many ways?
Oh, a dream feature.
Somebody might be listening. Who knows?
Who knows? Oh, gosh.
Or anything that you're a little bit frustrated or annoyed every now and again?
I would say if I could have a feature that could apply all of the original styles with all the new variables, but going from global styles to more semantic variables. Because right now it's just impossible to identify if this random blue color should be text blue or background blue, things like that. So maybe a smarter way to switch over to variables, because it is a bit of a undertaking. It's a big project and it's a little intimidating to a lot of people, so making that even easier would be great.
Okay. Well, I think thank you so much for your wonderful insights and for the wonderful presentation as well. So please give a warm round of applause to Mona, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona.